Hello, party people, and welcome to Let Me Speak to a Manager. In today's episode, we talk about two types of decision makers, the maximizer and the satisficer. And I did not make up that second stupid word an economist or a psychologist did. Thank you so much for listening to us. If you haven't subscribed, please do, and we hope you love this episode.
You're listening to Let Me Speak to a Manager with Frank Cava and Ian Mathews.
What a crock of shit.
Yeah, that was hot mic, Sam.
It's 30 minutes away. I'll be there in 10.
Do it live! I'll write it and we'll do it live!
Frankie!
Ian, you son of a bitch!
How are you, buddy?
Oh, I am great. I'm hydrated, most importantly.
It's important to hydrate, Frank, after a couple of days. Well, you've been in dry temperatures. You've been out in Arizona, haven't you, this week?
I was out in Arizona. I had a 3-day love affair at the airport. I was supposed to fly out at 2 o'clock on Friday, and I ended up getting out at 8 o'clock in the morning on Sunday. That was a good time. Good time.
So two nights in the airport hotel?
Yeah, I refuse to do that. I don't do all this stuff to fly coach. So I told the girl at Delta that I was working with, I'm like, I'm just going back to the same hotel I was in before. I checked into the same hotel 3 times.
What was the deal? Why were they having so much trouble? It can't be because of a lot of traffic.
It's fabulous that you asked that question. And this is my favorite answer. Oh, they wrote me a handwritten note and fully explained everything.
That was nice of them.
I have no idea. Like, what was the problem? I don't know. There's a great scene in a Jim Carrey movie. He's like, what are you going to do? He goes, I'm going to go over there and I'm going to take it up the tailpipe. And he goes, you've been here before. That's what it feels.
Yes, that's Liar Liar.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So we are talking about decision making today. And what we are talking about is the difference between maximizing and satisficing. And we'll get into this in a second. And my initial thought when I heard of this concept, there's a restaurant in Chicago. It was one of our favorites. Me and Jenny loved this place. It was called Leona's. It was an Italian restaurant. It was affordable. You know, we were kids. This is 20 years ago. But the menu completely stressed me out. It was, Frank, it was like a 14-page menu. One of those, they were one of those kind of restaurants that could do everything. They were Italian/American. So, you know, restaurants like that pretty much have everything on the menu. And it was all pretty good, but it would always be like 20 minutes just to order. And it got to a place where I was avoiding going there because I'd be like, I don't know about Leona's. I don't want to look at that menu. And I'd say that to Jenny and she'd be like, look, let's not open the menu. We love the cheese sticks. We love the pizza. Can we just go get cheese sticks and pizza? And I'd say, okay, but not looking at the menu. She's like, we're going to tell them no menus, just cheese sticks because we love their cheese sticks. And I would always have more fun when I went to Leona's when they didn't give me the menu. And so that is satisficing. That is satisficing is when you satisfy your conditions, but maybe you don't pick the optimal conditions for that day and you don't stress out about the decision versus maximizing where you study that menu, every nook and cranny of it until you find what you think is going to be perfect. Do you ever have those experiences at restaurants? Do you ever feel that way?
So I love that you went with restaurants right off the bat. For those of you that have looked at our logo, it's Ian and me eating. So I think this is a perfect place to start. In addition to that, Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee with Jerry Seinfeld is an awesome show that I loved. And he interviews Will Ferrell, and they get a menu that looks like the size of the Bible. And Will Ferrell goes, I love a menu like this because you know the chef does everything just right.
That stresses you out when you see a menu like that. You're like, there's just no way you can do chicken cacciatore pizza and you can also bang out a really good Szechuan chicken. Like you can't do all those things well in your kitchen.
Or the kitchen must be much bigger. Like there's no way you can accomplish all of that back there.
Yes. Yes.
So I don't necessarily get stressed out by a menu like that, but what I end up doing is my expectations immediately get lowered. So when I see there's a menu of that size, like I think of like TGI Fridays. And when I was a little kid, TGI Fridays was awesome because back then, like they had potato skins, they had cheese sticks, they had like the Oreo Speedwagon, which was basically just like a milkshake with like Oreos thrown in it. My brother and I used to love that thing. But I remember being like a kid and the menu was sizable, but not, the Magna Carta. And then by the time I like stopped going there in high school or college with my parents, the menu had gotten like 6 times bigger. Like I was like, it was really good before. Like, why did they add all this other stuff? And so, and from a business standpoint, why they no longer have a niche that works. So they're trying to expand to keep people coming back. But you just know that it's becoming mid-range. It's not as good. It's becoming watered down because of all those choices. And it's stressful because it's like you got 1,000 choices.
And compare that, we've both been to Italy. Compare that to an amazing restaurant in Italy where they come around, they don't even hand you a menu. They just kind of know what we're cooking back there today.
Here's what's fresh today.
Like we found some great mushrooms. It's winter. There's some mushrooms out in the forest back there. So we're making a really good mushroom ravioli. And they give you like 5 things and they say I remember a couple of places I went to with Jenny in like the Tuscany area where they would just bring it all to you. Like, here's what we're making tonight. We're just going to bring it all over to you. And it was the least stressful experience ever. And even in Italy, on top of that, they always have the wine of the day, the wine of the house wine. They bring it in the big carafe. But that wine also was usually not just crappy wine. It was wine from a local winery that had like a little bit left at the bottom of their barrel, and they are friends with the owner. And so they just sold them the rest of the barrel and they would serve it to everyone. It was delicious. You didn't have to think. They gave you pasta, some meat, and some wine.
So we're going to get into this in the summary, which is clearly a ways from now since we're still introducing the episode. But I think I want to say this now. A maximizer versus a satisficer. I don't think you're one or the other. I think it can be situational. But I think it comes down to this. The maximizer is someone who tries to squeeze every drop out of something and someone who is almost a perfectionist. A satisficer is someone who allows a margin of error. And I want to say, this is mostly a business podcast, so I want to say this here. There's people who come into an interview and they tell you, I'm a perfectionist. I'm a perfectionist. Like, I do everything right. I can't delegate because I'm a perfectionist. And I think people say that in a way that there's a badge of courage. And to me, that means you're probably going to be a terrible employee because you can't lift up your head long enough to see something. Where someone who is a satisficer understands when something's close enough and also understands kind of how to enjoy things. And what I think is the Italian restaurant that you're talking about, because we've both been to these before, some together, some not together. They understand, hey, this is what we can do the best today, and it's close enough, and that's what's on the menu. And from a business perspective, if you're going to be a maximizer with a normal career, there's times to do it. And if you're going to be Jeff Bezos or Steve Jobs, you're probably going to need to be a maximizer, because if you're not going to have enough detail in what it is you're focusing on.
So the term satisficer is a blend of satisfy and suffice. And it was coined by Herbert Simon in the 1950s, a psychologist. No relation to Simon and Garfunkel that I could find in our half-ass internet research, but I'm not ruling it out. I'm not ruling it out because they're both pretty famous.
We can play Bridge Over Troubled Water as like our sign off on this one.
Put that in the show notes for sure. So maximizers in general. So Simon and Garfunkel both believed, they believed that people are maximizers or satisficers, or at least most people lean heavily towards one or the other. So like everything, humans are complicated. We're not all one thing, but they did, through this study, they did believe that people, and there's like a 20 questionnaire that you could that they answered to kind of figure some of this out. But you leaned one or the other. And what they found was maximizers, they tend to dwell on decisions after the fact. So these are folks that really get FOMO, fear of missing out, versus satisficers are usually good with their option choice, even if it's not the best option, because they value their time and they want to avoid the anxiety of choice in the first place. So, a maximizer is someone who will study the menu forever in a restaurant, can't really decide, ask the waiter, ask everyone at the table, what should I get, the lamb chops or the fish? Finally get the fish, take a bite of the fish, and immediately say, I should have ordered the lamb chops. So even though they put way more time and thought into their decision, they're rarely happy with it because they agonized over it so much. And even when they maximize, they're not really happy with the utility of their decision.
I agree with that. And we've all seen those kind of things. My argument on you're one or the other is this. Like in life, I would kind of say almost always I'm a satisficer. Would you not agree that with yourself?
I'm a satisficer for sure.
But were you like, I don't know what you'll say to this, but I feel like in picking a mate, picking a spouse, I was more of a maximizer. I was really like, there was certain things that I got married in my 40s, but like that was where I had an incredibly high bar. And because like you're signing on for a lifetime, commitment here. So like in that instance, like I was very detail oriented and it wasn't okay. Like, does that make sense?
Yeah. I think we'll get into this a little bit. I think a big chunk of when you were dating though, and when you met Ellie was in the world of online dating, where I think the choice is overwhelming. And there's a book by Barry Schwartz, he's another psychologist, called The Paradox of Choice. And he makes a point that people are less happy today because there are so many choices that we feel stressed about missing things. And social media just amplifies that because we can see what everyone's doing all the time. But the internet has made it possible to go anywhere, do anything, talk to anyone, start any business. And so, take our grandparents, Frank, they didn't have a lot of choices, right? They didn't have a lot of choices. Immigrants coming over here didn't have a lot of choices. There were a few jobs you could maybe get because you barely spoke the language. My grandpa grew up in Alabama. When he was a kid, he either went out hunting rabbits or fishing, and that was his two choices. So he wasn't terribly unhappy if he chose one or the other, because yesterday I did that, so I'm going to do this today. Whereas, and I think today, your choices are infinity. They're limitless. There's so many things that you and I are having a recorded podcast right now in 2 different cities and different areas. The things we can do with our time are outrageously more. And so what Barry Schwartz and The Paradox of Choice says is it makes for a more stressful world because you agonize over being perfect. And I think when you talk about you were a maximizer, you had a girlfriend for a very long time and then you didn't. And you came into this world of dating that was online. And so you were using Match.com. And I remember you using these apps where there's literally thousands and thousands of people that you could look at their face picture. I didn't have any of that. I went to a bar and I scanned it and tried to find the best looking girl I could find and see if she wanted to talk to me. And I didn't agonize if that wasn't perfect. That was the best I could find in that bar that night.
Right. And it was funny when I was single and you were 10, 15 years married when this is all happening, because like you were stressed out for me because of what I was looking at and what I had going for me,
Stressed me out.
Yeah. So I'm going to tell a couple of funny stories. Some of these are related, some of them aren't, but they're funny stories. So here's the first one. Like if you want to date and you want to be stressed out using an online app, leave your phone around your asshole friend Ian so he can log into your Match.com account and direct message a bunch of girls and tell them, I'm really gassy. maybe it's because of the beans. He literally messaged like 15 people one day while I was in another room playing with his kids, providing free babysitting. He sent out this message to a ton of people. So
I destroyed like a month's worth of recon work you've been doing with those girls.
set me back. But so that was one. But
Set me back. And to start all over, create a new profile, everything, just creeped everyone out.
so the other thing that's kind of funny about like paradox of choice is I told this story again a couple of days ago, but I think it's worthy of repeating. So I was stuck in an airport in Arizona. I finally got home literally 48 hours after I was supposed to. And my wife is 9 months pregnant. Now she's not due, so I wasn't being reckless and being gone, but we thought we were okay. So she calls me up on Sunday when I'm already supposed to be home, and she's like, "Hey, I'm 9 months pregnant. I'm having some complications. I need to go to the hospital." I'm like, "Okay." So like I'm in the back seat of a car getting driven home because the best flight I could get was 2 hours away, and our babysitter's name is Bethany. So I call Bethany, and I'm like, "Hey, it's Frank." She's like, "Oh, hey." And then I just go right into it. And I just start talking about the things my wife was talking about. And then there's like this awkward pause. And at the end of the awkward pause, she's like, "Do you happen to have more than one Bethany in your phone?" And I'm like, "I don't think so. Are you not the Bethany that's, with my son right now in Richmond, Virginia?" She's like, "No." I'm like, "I apologize." So I hung up and called the other Bethany, and then like my mind started racing, and I'm like, "Who the hell was that?" It turns out it was somebody that I met like 8 years ago that I hung out with for like a week in San Diego. And I just called this girl out of the blue. But the best part is, like, I have a good enough relationship with my wife where I just told her the story, and she's like, "That's hysterical." And not only was it hysterical, she's like, "I wonder how many people have the last name of Match in my cell phone."
She needs to go through and delete it. She needs to purge all of her last name Match in there. Run a search.
So having Match.com is like that menu that's like 4 inches thick with Szechuan chicken and a beautiful bucatini.
But I think it's worth talking about here, Frank. So let's take it from a business perspective. You're looking for a job, you're looking for a career. Again, it can be overwhelming. It can feel like I could go anywhere, I could do everything. Now people are working virtual, so you don't have to move to different cities. There are millions of job openings, and it can be overwhelming when you're looking for it. Am I choosing the right industry? Am I choosing the right company? Am I choosing? And if you try to optimize, you may never find something good in the first place. Rather than, if you're looking for a job, should you be really asking the question of, what are 5 non-negotiable things I want out of a job? And does this company meet those 5 things? Not, is it the best company in the world to meet those things?
So one of the things that you and I have talked about a lot is you're always someone that kind of makes a decision and you don't dwell on it. And as a 45, 46-year-old, I feel like I'm way better at that than I was as a kid. But I kind of grew up in a way that was, you always kind of second guess decisions. And I think how you can apply this in the business sense is this. If you came up with a wish list of 3 to 5 items, very small, of what the job needs to have for you, or what something needs. If you have a checklist of 300 items, it's going to be so hard to satisfy that. But if you have a checklist of a few items, it's easier to satisfy it. And I think there is a greater deal of satisfaction that comes with it, because you're willing to let enough stuff kind of fall to the margin. While I'm saying this, if you're not watching the video, Ian has a picture of Braveheart behind him. Like, Braveheart had one thing. He wanted freedom. That's it. He was fighting, he was battling, he lost people close to him, his wife was killed, but he was incredibly satisfied because he was just chasing one thing. It was very niche. It's very specific. But it wasn't a laundry list of 900 things. It was one thing, and he had a great purpose. So if you are looking for something like that, it's easier to kind of start broad, 1 item, 3 items, and then kind of hone it in as time goes on and redefine it. But I think that's kind of the best way to look for a job, to look for a mate, to look for, is this a good deal? Is it not a good deal? There's a lot of things you can build on if you just start really broad.
I like that. And in this study, Schwartz found it, Simon found it, both of them talk about it. Maximizers, they struggle to enjoy the journey. So a maximizer is so focused on that utilitarian thought process of, I have to find the optimal solution to what I'm looking for, that they don't really pay much attention to everything that happens along it. So they tend to, even when they do reach their destination, they have a higher level of regret, lower levels of happiness. Whereas in Satisficers, they open themselves up more often. They're more likely to say yes to new things, and they're more like explorers. They stop and pay attention to things along the way, and they enjoy it, and they're not afraid to kind of zigzag a little bit. They don't get so fixated on an end goal, an optimal goal, that they're a little more flexible in how they move.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think most of the people we interact with are not maximizers. We're just not. Like in a sales process, we call the maximizer a driver. It's an engineer. It's someone who is really detail oriented, someone who wants to read every single word of a contract. And what you find is, if you're not this kind of person, it's oil and water. You bump heads with this person a lot because they're very, very, very specific.
I think I love that you just brought up engineer, because this is exactly an engineer's personality, a scientist personality, an accountant that needs to has to be the balanced book. Like they find great satisfaction in it. Right now with Keep, with our car alarm startup, our CEO, David, he's surrounded all day by engineers, and sometimes he'll just call me and he's exasperated. He's like, I was on a call today with 11 engineers, and we're trying to maximize battery life so the battery lasts for 42 days. Like, what are we doing, guys? People don't leave their car longer than 24 hours. This battery doesn't have to get us through a nuclear winter. And, that's his job. His job as a CEO is making those trade-off decisions, because if you let engineers make decisions, they'll just keep optimizing until you have the most expensive possible device inside of it that customers won't pay for. So his job is to kind of tell the engineers every once in a while, let's move along. This cellular module we're working for is good enough. This Bluetooth device that we've put inside is good enough. We don't need to have the best of everything inside, because if you end up doing that, we'll be selling a car alarm that costs $1,800.
So aside from sales, because I think sales is an outlier here, I'm trying to run through the analysis in my head. Most other jobs besides sales, you must be really good at being a maximizer. And I'll go into a couple of examples. You're building houses. You are an engineer. You are, I don't know, basically everything I can think of. You need to have an accountant. You have some level of detail that you're paying attention to. But then people struggle when they become managers, because they're so used to looking at every single detail and doing things one certain way, that if you move up to manage, other people can be maximizers under you, but they might be doing it differently than how you would do it. And to manage, you need to be a little bit more of a satisficer. You really have to be. And it might be that you have people under you that are incredibly detail oriented and talented, but they all do it differently. So on the whole, you can't manage everyone to do it exactly the same. And that's where the transition kind of happens. And I think that's what people struggle with. They have the technical chops to do the job, but they can't grow past it, because that requires a level of trust in others and some margin of error, if you will, or some difference in technical definition, because that's what management is.
I mean, I think this is worth staying on for a second, because I'm going through a little bit of this. 2 weeks ago, you asked me, what's your holdback on this? So, I'm working with a company down in Florida, and they want management training for all of their folks. And
Right.
giving them a proposal, they want me there a lot. They want me to come into town to give, to give some presentations, and they want some keynotes. They want live coaching. They wanted some design work. It's $100,000 package, but it would require me on a plane a lot. It would require me to spend a lot more of my hours, my time, and on the road. And it's also at a time where this is spring. This is
Baseball season, baby.
this is baseball season. This
It's
is
not Christmas. It's the only time Ian's off from baseball.
Frank yesterday asked me if we could record something, and I said no. And I said it's baseball season, and Frank goes, "What exactly is baseball season?" And I gave him like an 11-month window. So regardless, so it didn't work for me exactly where I wanted, or where this client wanted for me. But we're kind of falling on a program that's 30 to 35,000. That's not going to have me live. It's not going to have as much design work. It's going to be more video calls and program. So it's less profitable for me. It's not maximizing for me. Instead of pushing the customer to wait until fall or late summer, it was better for them and better for me to do something less pricey, less involved with my hours, but that's pertinent, that's helpful to them. And I'm good with it. I'm not going to look back and be like, wow, I left 65,000 on the table. That's just not how I'm wired. I won't do that. I'm good with my decision. And I didn't try to force the customer into something that wasn't perfect for them. And I also didn't concede on something important to me, which is coaching. That's important to me right now.
So, I mean, I listened to everything you said. So where are we at with that? Like, is there...
I'm going to do I re-quoted it. I put a second proposal together. I quoted the $35,000 package. We're doing that package.
So that's basically satisficing. You're basically saying it's a gloss over. It's not exactly what everybody wants, but it's better than nothing. And at the same time, it allows me to kind of keep some parameters.
Yeah. And it's still very profitable to me, and it allows me more flexibility than I would have had. And you did a great job of coaching me the other day when I was just frustrated with myself. Like, what the hell's wrong with me? Why am I turning this down? And you just said, what's your holdup? And you just wouldn't let me get off of it. You asked me like 3 different times, and you basically threatened to turn it into a podcast episode. And I said, I'm not doing that. But it at least when I got off the phone with you, as you normally do, you're a great coach in that way. I was irritated with you for pushing me on it, but then I was irritated at myself of, why don't you just answer his question? And the question was just find a balance, find something that is not as profitable, but gives you all the flexibility, and both parties win. It was satisficing in a major way.
So I think we should probably say this here because I think it's relevant. Like, I think most great managers are satisficers. I think most people who are successful in the corporate structure in America are satisficers. But I think maximizers are people in the military, people in communist governments, for example, or people building airplanes or cars. Like I want someone who's building my car to be a maximizer. Like every rivet, every bolt, every nut, every screw is in the exact right place. And if we don't have that, we're going to have major problems. So I think you need to know where you are in your station of life. Are you a doer or are you a manager? I think we need to think about what your product is, and do you have the ability to have flexibility there? And if you're an entrepreneur like Ian and me, it's really hard sometimes to come to terms with what do you want to do, because you don't really have to do anything. And that's the like, you talk about a menu being overwhelming, having absolutely no tether to anything on what you can and can't pick to do for work is also incredibly hard. It's way harder than ordering something on a 25-page menu.
Damn, man, this is really good. We should stay on this. So you're coaching me as you're speaking. I'm thinking about this. So not having a boss, not having to do anything is just as overwhelming, if not more than having a boss and just being told what to do, because So take me, I have a whole bunch of different routes that can make money right now, right? And you know of which. I have commercial real estate. I can write and make a little money. I sell online programs. I can bill out my hourly rate as an executive coach. I have a tech startup. I have lots of different things that I could spend my time on at any given time. And sometimes that's overwhelming to me because, I can choose to spend my time in any of those, and any choice on any one is a choice to not spend time on something else. And so it can be very overwhelming to me some days when I come in. It's like, which one of these do I spend my time on? I don't have demands. I don't have employees coming in and saying, what should we do, boss? What do we like? I don't have any of that. I'm my boss. And that can be very overwhelming. If I were a maximizer, I don't know that I would do as much things that I consider as fun as I think. If I was a maximizer, I don't know if I'd be doing a podcast with you. I don't know that you'd be doing a podcast with me. It won't be profitable for us for a while. It's fun, but we would probably drive each other nuts on this podcast if we were maximizers, because we would never, ever publish anything until we got a better camera, until we got a better microphone, until we had a better social media team. We would never do anything. We'd just be paralyzed.
I'm gonna talk about both of these two things. A boss and no boss. I've said this here before. I say it all the time. I said it a lot when I first quit my job. The best thing about having no boss is you have no boss. The worst thing about having no boss is you have no boss. And what that means is no one's telling you what to do. So you got to figure out what it is that you are going to do it. And there's an abyss too. Like the abyss is this. Who the hell are you to think you can achieve that? Who the hell are you to think you should be working on that? Like, how the hell do you think with no formal writing training, you could be a writer for Forbes? How do you think as like a C student with an A+ work ethic, you think you could be a real estate developer? There's all these things. There's doubt, there's fear, there's what do I focus on first? There's no freaking roadmap. You got to kind of figure it out. The other thing is too, like if we were, like I've hired and brought in maximizers and a lot of them don't work because they're so detail oriented, they can't function enough in the gray to make things work. If you and I were maximizers, we would have never quit our jobs. We would have had paralysis. Like, screw it, let's do it, or done is the new perfect are two things that you do not say if you are a maximizer. That's a satisficer. The satisficer gets it out there and then iterates and iterates and iterates. And if you are someone who can do that, you have to be able to live with a little bit of discomfort always if you are a satisficer. That's kind of how it feels to me.
You think about, Frank, how many people complain about their manager, right? My boss is an idiot, makes me do certain things that I don't want to do. It always has me doing extra things. But you also, the other side of that is it takes an incredible decision-making burden off of you when your manager is giving you directives and deadlines and things to go work on. There's no thought process. There's no decision-making. You do what you're told. And you do it to the best of your ability. It takes it off of you. But when you become your manager, it adds this whole level of anxiety of how you're spending your time. Are you spending it well? Are you ready to do certain things, to take on certain things, taking on commitments? The deal I just told you about, we agreed in terms on the phone, and I had to call my attorney and be like, hey, how's this proposal look? How do I put this even in writing, what I just proposed to him? I didn't know how exactly to do it. I just kind of proposed a price and set it up. I had to set up my website a little different to do it right. There's so much of being an entrepreneur is satisficing, I think, because you have to just decide on what's the next step, and it's never optimal. I feel like I never make an optimal decision. I feel like if there are optimal decisions, I'm not one who's good at making them. I'm just making decisions, and I'm moving, and I'm selling this property in Orlando, and I've had a few people ask me like, why do you think now's the time to do it? And I'm like, I don't. Here's what I'm thinking. It's kind of a gut. I feel fortunate that it's as profitable as it was in 2.5 years. Could it be more profitable? I waited 2 more years, maybe. I don't know. But Frank, there's no manual. I don't have a boss who's saying, why are you doing that? Or should you, and worse, I have investors that I worry about. So it's like, okay, we've all made good money and I'm taking some risk off the table for all of us. So in a way, I'm satisficing. I'm not maximizing on that, but it's really profitable. And I don't want it. It's the old, pigs get fat, hogs get slaughtered. I think there's a little bit of that investing as well, satisficing.
For sure. So what I had written down is you never need to apologize for taking a profit. That's satisficing. You and I have both talked and giggled many times about making and losing money on Apple. Like, we're probably the two people on earth that at some point lost money on Apple. Like, we're like, oh, we're going to sell. Like, what idiot has lost money on Apple in the last decade besides us? So but that's part of it. Like, the other piece of it is too, like, if you take a win on something, you take the win, you can sit back and you can say, here's a great example. I sold a house, 522 North 27th Street. The house does not matter. I bought it for 65 grand and I sold it for 208. And it took me 13 months. And I sold it in the beginning of 2014. That house just sold again for like 500. Mm-hmm. In the 7 years since I've sold it, everybody, like, it's traded hands 3 times. And everyone that just bought it and moved into it and sold it has made multiples past what I made as the person who did all the damn work. Like, the pictures are the same. It's the same house.
Yeah.
And I could get so frustrated to look at it like, this is what happened. But at the moment in 2014, when I sold it, I needed the income.
But Frank, so I sold it. If you didn't buy and sell all those little 65s to 100, 65s to 140, 65s to 200, you would have 2 employees right now.
Right.
You'd be tiny still. You'd be small and you'd be just holding on to assets. All your money would be tied up. You wouldn't have leveraged it, turned it into the next thing. I mean, part of what I'm doing with the collision center of selling, similar thing, right? I'm giving up some of the profits, but it's a great profit. It's an exciting one. So this one is a $3.5 million deal, selling it for 4.2 million. I have investors that are about half of that, and I keep a chunk of their equity. So to me, the whole thing is probably a 40-some% deal that I did 2.5 years ago, but it's going to free up capital. So let's say in 5 years, Frank, this thing's worth 6 million. It's in Orlando. It's in a great area. That could happen. But I'm freeing up a bunch of capital. I might go do a couple deals with you. I might go do a couple more deals of something else. What else am I passing up by sitting and hoping it'll get better? I love what you said, like, never apologize for taking a profit. And yeah, I might pay a little taxes this year. Okay. Paying taxes is fine. That means I made a bunch of money. That's a good thing.
So I drive by that house. I don't get into the field nearly as much as I used to, but when I'm in the field, I drive by that house and I get 2 sets of emotions. Damn, I wish I still owned it. But I'm glad I don't, because I'm glad I don't led me here. Like, you and I have talked about, if you don't sell that collision center, you and I want to start a fund. We want to actually raise real money and we want to put it into real estate. And you and I have talked about deals and where we're going to place it and where we're going to bring to market. Could you make more? Sure. Will you make more if you hold it? Almost certainly. It's a matter of when you sell it. But what else will it be? What's the launching point? A satisficer is someone who is okay with not knowing. Like, jumping off a diving board as a kid is a satisficer. You don't know what's going to happen. You've got pretty good data. Like, if you can swim, you're going to get up, but you're taking a leap of faith. And that's what quitting your job is, starting a business, selling something, every single thing. And you will be absolutely riddled and probably kill yourself with doubt and cancer if you sit down and just lament every decision. Where what you have to do at some point is you have to have the bathtub brain. You got to say, that was a good decision for the moment, Good enough, pull it, move on. Now, there is some level of needing to look backwards and analyze what you've done, good and bad, and maybe calibrate and get better.
Yeah.
But you also have to give yourself a little bit of grace and just say, hey, I made the best decision I could at the time. And that's got to be good enough.
Totally agree. So the next point.
Can we do one more thing in here? I want to say one more thing. So I have a friend of mine in Florida. You know him. He lives in Tampa. We talk about him a lot. And I'll stop there so we don't get too close. But he makes between $1 and $2 million a year. He runs a small business. It's incredibly successful. $1 to $2 million is a lot of money. That is a ton of money.
That's real money in Tampa.
It's real money, like anywhere.
Anywhere.
Like
real money in Moscow.
Right, for sure. But what I tell him all the time is they don't just hand out $1 million a year jobs. Like, you got to have something special. And what you really need to be good at is you got to kind of focus enough where you have a niche product. You don't have the menu that's 900 pages, but at the same time, you're willing to overlook enough stuff where you can function and profit. That's what it really boils down to, is kind of picking and choosing those things and getting good enough at it. And if you do it right, that's how a capitalist society and a business society like ours rewards you. It penalizes you because you always live in this state of not knowing and some level of uncertainty, but it rewards you with huge amounts of money if you do it right.
Yep. So the worst part, the people that are on the far spectrum of maximizing, what I've found in business is they get into a paralysis,
right?
Analysis by paralysis. And I've got an example. I worked for a president that could not make a decision, just could not make a decision. And I think at the heart of it, one, it was a confidence issue, but wanted every decision to just be perfect, wanted there to be zero chance that the decisions he made could come back to make him look bad in front of the CEO. We decided to go paperless, and we were 10 years too late to do it when we decided in the first place. But we're a finance company. Finance companies have just thick files, 3-inch files on everybody, paper, outrageous dollar amounts we spent on paper. We made a decision to go paperless. And when we did, we started with like a dozen software companies, dozen software providers. And it took us forever to make a decision and go through this evaluation process, because all of them had to come in and present to us. All of them had to give us 2 or 3 customers as referrals that we could talk to. Our IT department had to dig into all of their requirements. We went on field trips to go see how this software was working. And it just dragged on forever, when really, looking back of it, this process taking 2 years, we kind of knew the 3 companies that had 60% of the market. We could have looked at those 3, talked to a few of our biggest partners and said, which one do you like best and why? And just made a decision. And Frank, the money we would have saved in just paper alone, if we'd have just started, it would have way made up. So by maximizing, maybe we found the best software provider, maybe we didn't. But by doing that, the cost of taking too long to maximize was way greater than just making a decision and living with it.
So I never made it as high up the food chain as this guy, and I know who you're talking about. And he was in a very high paying job inside of a corporation. I mean, a president in a corporation, that's high. But what I did when we were making a similar decision, we started a property management division 3 years ago. And what we did is I went up to the woman I hired the right person, and I told her, we need a software program. I was like, find me no less than 3 and no more than 5, research them, come back to me in no more than 2 weeks, and give me your findings. And today, 3 years in, she's like, I think we picked the wrong one. I'm like, no. We picked the right one for then.
For the time.
The market's changed. We're better. There's other products that have innovated and gotten better than this particular product. So we'll iterate again. But in the last 3 years, we built an entire division which didn't exist. We manage 400 properties a year. We have 0%, like damn near 0% vacancy, 100% collections.
Awesome.
It was really good to us.
Good decision.
Is it perfect? Who cares? It's damn near. And now we're saying, hey, there's different pieces of information. Let's make a new good decision and continue to ride it forward.
Frank, so 3 years ago, I go down to this single family real estate. What do you even call that? Was that a conference?
The one you went to with me in Miami?
Yeah. Is that a conference? Was that a conference?
It was a conference.
It was a conference. So I go down there with Frank. This is right after I left NVR. I don't have much going on. So he's like, come down here, you meet some people, see what I do. And really, I just was looking for a 3-day trip to Miami with Frank anyway. So I go down there, and Frank, Mr. Big Swing and D, he's leading a couple of side sessions, and we're in this room.
The panel discussion. So I'm sitting in the back of the room. I got some notes, but I'm not really taking any because Frank's talking. But there's another guy who's moderating, and he's got all these challenges, which he was kind of fishing for excuses out of this group of owners of real estate. And one of the bullet points was software. And he starts saying, okay, what kind of software are you using to run project management? And all these guys are going in circles of, if we just had this software, it would really help us. And if we had this software, and then they started arguing over how some software was holding their business back. And I'm watching Frank, and he's squirming. Like, you could tell Frank has no patience with this kind of nonsense. And you could tell he was getting irritated. And finally, Frank asks if he can have the microphone. He grabs the microphone, and I'm paraphrasing, but it was kind of like, I built a 300 unit a year business that makes $7 million with Excel. And he was like, software's not your problem. And like, everyone got really quiet in this room. Like it was like, he pretty much just spanked them all in the room. And he was like, let's move on to the next bullet. And that was the end of it. And so all the time I joke with Frank about his time when he just clowns all of these dudes for talking about software. He's like, I got Microsoft Excel. That's it. You left out one very critical other piece of technology. I use Word also. Microsoft Word and Excel.
Word and Excel. I built a 30-person business with Word and Excel. I don't want to hear about your software problems. It was amazing. But what was happening in that room is everyone was feeling sorry for themselves, and they were thinking about the things they didn't have, and they got themselves into paralysis. And really, I think in business, you just got to ask, what are the trade-offs of a long evaluation process? If Frank would have waited for the perfect $100,000 software to run his business, he'd have never run his business. So he used Excel, and he built a huge business until the point where he had enough excess cash flow to go buy some decent software. And that was kind of it.
That's it. And I think we beat this one to death. I think the important thing isn't the software. The important thing is the product, what it does for you. Like, people own thousands of units and they didn't have computers. Like, it's not software, it's the other part. And it's either an excuse or it's paralysis, but you want someone to manage it who is a maximizer. But as the owner, you want to be a satisficer. You want to look at it and say, we're pretty damn good. 98%, keep rolling. And that's, and society rewards that.
So this leads to a term in psychology called mental accounting. And there's a famous study of New York City taxi drivers where if you were to look at a taxi driver from a traditional economic standpoint, they would maximize their utility, meaning on days where it was busy and they were getting high fares, they would work longer hours. And you would expect on days where it wasn't busy and they weren't making as much on fares that they would come home early because it wasn't a profitable day. Kind of like fish more when the fish are biting than on days where it's slow. But what they found is it was the exact opposite. Taxi drivers quit early on days where they were making more money and worked longer on days when they were making less. So what they found was the average the average and the far and away the majority of taxi drivers were satisficers, in that if they had a number, mental accounting, let's say it's $300 a day they wanted to make. Once they kind of hit their number, they quit working. And that meant if it was in 4 hours, then they quit in 4 hours. If it took 13 hours, they would just work through there, even though economic theory would tell you that or predict the opposite of that behavior. And I think this is one area where, in talking with you, you and I are both a little bit more maximizer, in that we tend to stay out on the lake longer if the fish are really biting. We're a little different than taxi drivers here. We're not satisficers. We know when it's raining to go out with the bucket and stay out there as long as it's pouring, because we know it doesn't come too often.
So in my business, we use a testing platform called Predictive Index. And I think I've mentioned it here before. I think there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 16 different profiles. And I'm what's called a strategist. So it's someone who's always thinking and trying to kind of think about the next several moves. And I go into a meeting, I've always got a page of notes. I've thought through it ahead of time, so I know how to navigate. That's how I think. I don't think everyone's wired that way. And I think the taxi cab drivers that we're talking about certainly aren't. But I think, like, as a whole, Ian and I are both satisficers more than maximizers. But from time to time, it makes sense to be a maximizer. I talked about it while selecting a spouse. Right now, around managing salespeople, it's very hard to manage. But what I always tell them is my compensation plan is built. If for everyone in sales, if you hit certain thresholds, you make more. And when I bang the drum of, if you're at 50 and you can get to 65, if you're at 65 and get to 75, you can get from 75 to 100. If you can get there, your comp blows up. And most people are like, I'm at 80, that's pretty good. But I want you to work harder when you get at 80 and get to 100. And the reason is, for me as a business owner, you are going to make a ton. But as the business owner, I have already got sunk cost. My marketing is done. What I make goes through the roof if you go to 100. So it's this, and that's how the best comp plans are written, to get you to think about, I've hit my number for the month and it's the 20th. Should I work this weekend or not? And I think to have a good life, you need to be a satisficer most times. And you need to take your foot off the gas and enjoy things. But from time to time, when it's right, you got to hit it. And that's when you push. Like when I was in sales, Ian, I can remember times when I was sitting on like a 5 and I was crushing my month and the month was half over and I just wanted to get to 8. Like that's going to set me up. I'm going to have a $60,000 month. That's going to set me up for the whole year. So that's the kind of stuff that you have to think about from a strategy perspective. If you can just grind it out and get that incredible month, take a month off, because that's the mentality that I think we're trying to drive at.
And I think business owners make mistakes here where they get overly focused on how much a certain level is making, and they don't think about how much am I making as the business owner. And so they cap commission plans. They don't let someone enjoy in the profit because they're too focused on the absolute number of, oh, a salesperson shouldn't make this, a project manager shouldn't make this. Well, what you should really be thinking about is, what are my goals, my personal goals as the owner? And if that means I got to pay people more, their motivation will stop wherever your cap stops.
Right.
If you make it so that they've hit their number in August, you better make it juicy for them, or they'll quit working the last 4 months of the year. They'll just chill. We worked at a big company that capped a lot of those different bonuses, but the goals of that company were not to burn through all its land. They would never tell you quit working, but they kind of didn't want you to go destroy it, because they had a very measured 5 and 10 year plan. And everyone, if everyone was making too much money, that meant that the plan wouldn't be in place long-term.
All true. And I think the takeaway here is this: from a from a balance standpoint and from a life standpoint of enjoyment, most of the time you need to just be someone who is a satisficer. But if you really want to enjoy your life, the few times in your life when you can be a maximizer, do it. Like I watched Ian get up at 3:30 in the morning while he had babies at home and go to work and put in 12-hour days and be home in time for bath time because he was in maximizer mode. Like that was the time where you were smashing it and you were sleeping very little and you were but it was a period. And that period of time passed. And when that period of time passed, because you did that in that moment, it gave you this incredible ability to do whatever the hell you wanted later. And
Yeah,
I think
that's fair. I think that's fair, Frank. As you're talking about that, there was a 6 or 7 year period where I thought to myself, I have a lot of runway to gobble up a lot more stock options if I kick ass, because there's no one else who can go take these extra territories on. They're going to have to ask me. I'm going to have leverage, and I'm going to get more options of a stock I know is about to explode. And I went all in for about 7 years of my life with work, and it set me up to retire a couple of times over. You're right. I absolutely maximized. And it was like babies, Jenny, work, nothing else. I didn't watch TV. I didn't know anything about pop culture references. I didn't go out much. I didn't do anything but work. That was it.
So Nicole's going to love this. In your Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like you have your pyramid, right? And you kind of look at that stuff and you made good decisions based upon it. And you're kind of where you're at now. So I'm not going to say anything I think is out of line here, but I'm going to kind of say it and walk through it. So clearly, Ian and I know each other incredibly well, and we have conversations that don't get recorded, and we just talk about stuff. So one of the things that we've talked about many times is what you're putting your focus on now. And in your pyramid, family and baseball are at the absolute top. But underneath that, and it's because you don't need money, so you set yourself up in a way that you don't have to have it. Underneath that is business opportunities. So you bought a couple of collision centers in cash, and then you bought the other collision center with some equity partners that you just talked about potentially selling. And then it comes down to making other good decisions. But because you're in a position where you get to make good decisions and you get to be discretionary, Keep comes along. You've already worked with David, you know him, and you and I have talked about this. Baseball and family are the things that are the absolute most important. I'll do some deals with Frankie. I'll put some time into writing. I have enough money coming in because I've set myself up right. But the next piece is David comes along with something that could be explosive like NVR stock. Now it might turn into nothing and you don't need it. But if it turns into something, it's going to be like a windfall like the stock is. That is the right way to toggle between the two. Like it's a way to build.
So Frank, I love that you're bringing that up. So all of that leads in right. So right now, Keep, our tech startup, we're building a product. So we're taking it from prototype to production. I don't have anything to sell. That's my skill set. I'm not in Atlanta. I have an engineering degree, but my engineering chops are not strong enough to add much value. So I'm working on strategy with David, doing other things, but you and I are talking about this. I see this wave coming where when we start getting busy, I'm going to go all in on Keep. And there is a very good chance I'm going to be back to maximizing, because if it has the runway that we all think it has, it could absolutely explode. And I am not going to shortchange it with effort. I could be, after 3 years of picking and choosing my battles, I could be back to all in again. And that'll be fine because the upside will be there. It'll be fun. And my family will understand it. They're probably sick of me hanging around too much anyway.
But it's, so people have asked me many times, like, what do you want for your kids? And I don't want to leave them a lot of money. I think that ruins them. I think the biggest things that I've had in my life that I've enjoyed the most have been the hardest, have been the biggest struggles. So the biggest thing I want for anybody that I'm close to is discretion, an ability to make discretionary decisions.
Yeah.
And that's what this is. This is a discretionary decision. Your discretionary decision is to say, you know what? It's time to maximize. And you're going to do that And like, here's a silly example. Like, Ian does all of the admin on our podcast. Like, he probably spends 5 to 10 hours a week with editing and other stuff. And I do none of it because I don't have time. But there's going to come a period where Ian's not going to have time to do it either. And it doesn't necessarily mean I have to do it. Maybe it's like, hey, we need to pay somebody, or we need to use someone on my staff, or those are different things that will make this. It's kind of like the software decision. We made the right decision at the time, and then we iterated. We made another good decision based upon it. But I think that's what people miss is you look at it and you're like, I don't want to grind. I don't want to do this. I'll have to do this forever. You don't. Like, forever is a very long time. But if you can do it for 36 to 60 months, like Nickel worked in New York City for 7 freaking years driving a train back and forth, like 12 and 14-hour days. Like, but it gave him a position where it's so unique now. His skill set's so different because he did all these things. And we always used a cliche.
And he saw a runway to a certain position that could change his life. So it was worth going and trying to get it.
And it will.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating. It comes down to the thing that we say a lot, which is, if you'll do for 10 years what others won't, you live the rest of your life the way others can't. But once you get there, like Tim Ferriss said this in his book, I built a way that I can live a 4-hour work week. I don't. Like, I like to work, but that's the discretionary part.
Yeah, he could work a 4-hour work week, but if he wants to work 40, he does. If he wants to work 60, he does, and it's as long. But what Ferriss does is he does things that are fun and nothing else. He's ruthless about cutting things out when he decides they're not fun anymore. So, Frankie, let's wrap this up with a few questions that people can ask themselves. As they're making decisions and they're maybe getting themselves into maximizer territory on things that they shouldn't, which they're going to regret it sometimes. Questions to ask yourself: does this choice satisfy my conditions? Right. So we talked about finding wives, and I was fortunate enough to find mine way earlier than yours, but Jenny blew away all of my conditions. I wasn't even about to take a risk of losing someone as special as her. This was a long time ago. I knew enough at that point, having dated long enough, to know she blew away all my conditions. And, we've been married almost 20 years. And am I a perfect mate for her? No, I'm sure she wishes I was handier around the house and doing other things, but I satisfy enough of Jenny's conditions where she keeps me around.
Right. Humility, I'm guessing, is high on the list of things that she's satisfied with you on, for sure.
Sure.
But does it satisfy my conditions? And this is mostly a business podcast. So it can satisfy your conditions for the moment. It can satisfy your conditions for a short period of time. It can satisfy your conditions for a while or get you to something else. You could lever it. And that's the beautiful thing, is you get to make choices. Like, if it's satisfying your conditions and your conditions change, you can change. You can either get a raise or a promotion or a different, go into a different realm, or you can leave and go to a different job. I mean, hell, it's one of the reasons why divorce rates are so high. Is people aren't happy and they go out and find something else. So does it satisfy is a question you probably need to ask yourself. And what I would say is you probably need to ask yourself annually, potentially as often as quarterly, but probably no more often than that, because if you're doing it more than that, you're driving yourself nuts, or it's really time to go.
Does it move me forward? I think that's a question that I think people get so caught up in making decisions that will get them to some optimal place in their career, that will get their business to some optimal level. I think the better question to just ask yourself is, am I getting closer? Does it move me forward? Am I getting closer to my goals, where I want to be? And does it have to be optimal? This is Frank's decision to use Excel and Word to grow his business instead of spending a lot on software. If it didn't add value at the time, he didn't do it. Now that he's bought the software, it helped him, and now he's about to buy even better software now. Does it get me where I want to go right now? Your software that Cindy said was the wrong choice it moved you forward enough, and you can make another decision now.
So years ago, when I was doing triathlons, there was like a briefing.
Humble brag alert, humble brag.
So Careful, big guy. So during the briefing, it's like a safety briefing. They kind of tell you different things. And part of what they told you was that if you are an empty Doritos bag and you just get in the water, you will finish the swim course in under an hour because it's got an incredible tide pulling you in. And why I use that example, I thought it was an incredible example when he used it about being a Doritos bag. A Dorito bag can't steer, it can't move its head up, it can't paddle. So like if you just get in the water, it's going to push you and you're going to finish the race because of the current. But along the way, you might not be exactly where you want to be, or everything might not be perfect. But that's the thing. Get yourself into a place where you're moving in the right direction. And while you're moving in the right direction and the tide's pulling along the Dorito bag, then you can make some decisions, but you're moving in the right direction. But there's inertia. That's the kind of stuff. But like if you're a normal human being, you'd be like, this isn't moving fast enough. I'm not learning enough. I'm not being paid enough. There's going to be things, but as long as you're moving in the right direction, even if it isn't perfect, it still makes sense to continue to move in that right direction. And then when you feel like you've stopped or you've reached the end, or you're not moving in the right direction, is when you need to make a different decision.
That's a great analogy. And don't get in if the current's taking you to a place you don't want to end up. Just kind of be smart enough to see, where is that current going? Where does that take me in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? And if you don't like those destinations, don't get in the water, because the current's going to take you, it's going to catch you up. So that could be a company's culture, it could be a market, it could be an industry, it could be anything. Don't get in if you don't like where that current's headed.
And I think the next question is, does it have to be optimal? We just answered that. If you think it's optimal and you get in the water and you're being pulled in one direction, awesome, keep riding it. If it's no longer optimal for you, get out, swim to shore and get in a different current. And that's it. It just has to generally be going in the right direction. And if it isn't, change it.
And the last thing I think is just, what are the trade-offs to spending too much time on this decision? If you got to make a decision at some point, not making a decision is making a decision. So if you just like our paperless, taking 2 years to come to that decision was completely ludicrous. I think a lot of us do the same thing, where we just don't make decisions. We waste time and we don't give enough weight to the opportunity cost of what it would mean to have just done something. So one thing that's going to stick with me long after this podcast, Frank, is you telling your manager that software did exactly what it was supposed to do. Even though it's not optimal right now, it did its job. If we need to upgrade it again, then let's upgrade it again. I just love that, right? Because there's trade-offs if you hadn't made that decision.
That's it. And it's, I don't know where I learned this, but it's kind of like you look at something, it was a good ship. It got us here. We got a better ship. We got a better car. We got a better opportunity, but we don't get here without that one. And that it's constant. I think there's a lot of prudence to celebrating what it is that got you somewhere. And I think this is a good way to wrap it. I'm not really very good with hypotheticals. I'm just not. Like when you ask me like a hypothetical question about something, my wife will do it a lot of times, and I can't really participate. And the reason I can't participate is I'm focused on what I've dealt with and what's happening and kind of where I'm at. And if I was having some other alternative life, I can't relate to it. And being present and grounded with that is part of that reasoning. But the other reason is I'm very happy with the decisions. Is it perfect? No. But that's the reason why most of the time I'm a Satisficer, is because it's good enough. It's a great life. I'm pleased with it. And I know when to hit the throttle and to be a maximizer.
I can tell you one thing for certain. I'm not going to second guess our decision to choose this topic for this podcast. I think it's just absolute dynamite material, incredible content. You were really good today. You really nailed it. Brought your game. I'm not going to second guess you as a podcast co-host either.
You know what I mean? I agree with you, Ian. You are correct. You really maximized with me.
I've absolutely have the optimal co-host. There is no doubt about it. I maximized. I did a great job. You settled, but that's okay. I'm glad that you're a Satisficer and you chose me. I maximized on this one.
I can't wait. My wife's in the other room. I can't wait to walk in there and have her giggle and tell me what I did wrong.
That's definitely happening. Hey, Frankie, great to see you, man.
Ian, always a pleasure.
See you, dude. Hey, if you're still here, that means you really like our show. We appreciate you. Thank you so much. And I just want to remind you that these bills don't pay themselves. So if you really like us, do us a huge favor. Share this show with your friends.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it.